At Christmas, my children rejected me. They told me I wasn't welcome at my own family table. But then, I handed them an envelope that made the entire room freeze. It was the first week of December, and everywhere I looked, the world was wrapped in the soft glow of Christmas lights. The neighborhood houses sparkled with red and green bulbs. Children laughed in the streets as they dragged small sleds behind them, and the air smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. For most families, it was the most wonderful time of the year. For me, Christmas had always been the season of warmth, togetherness, and unconditional love. But as I stood at my front window, watching the snow fall gently onto the empty driveway, I felt a coldness inside me that no blanket could fix. My children hadn't called. They hadn't visited. The laughter and joy I used to know at Christmas had slowly faded as the years passed. Once upon a time, Christmas in our house had been magical. I still remembered the sound of tiny footsteps running down the stairs, the squeals of excitement as wrapping paper flew across the living room, and the way we used to sit together afterward, just enjoying each other's presence. I remembered baking cookies with my daughters, their little hands covered in flour, while my son tried to sneak pieces of dough when he thought I wasn't looking. I remembered car rides where we blasted Christmas music, the kind of songs that got stuck in your head for days, but made us laugh endlessly. Those were the moments that shaped me, the moments that made me feel like the luckiest mother alive. But as time went on, life changed. My children grew up, and the bond that once seemed unbreakable began to show cracks. They were busy with their own lives, college, careers, relationships. I always understood that. Every parent has to let go at some point. But what I didn't understand was how quickly the distance grew, not just physically, but emotionally. Now, with Christmas only 2 weeks away, I found myself staring at a half-decorated tree in my living room. The ornaments hung awkwardly because I couldn't find the motivation to finish. Once, that tree had been the centerpiece of our family tradition. Every ornament had a story. The golden star my eldest daughter made in kindergarten. The little reindeer figurine my son insisted we buy at the Christmas market one snowy evening. The glass angel ornament from my late husband, who had passed far too early. Each decoration whispered memories, and each memory cut a little deeper. Still, I tried to convince myself that maybe this year would be different. Maybe they would show up. Maybe we would laugh again, like we used to. I told myself not to lose hope, because Christmas was supposed to be about miracles. I spent the following days preparing in silence. I baked cookies, just in case they came. I pulled out the old family recipe book, the one with yellowing pages and flour smudges from years of use. I even made the gingerbread house, though decorating it alone felt hollow. I wrapped gifts for each of them, small things that I thought would remind them of their childhoods. A new book for my eldest daughter, who once spent hours reading by the fireplace. A warm scarf for my youngest son, who always lost his winter clothes, but loved the feel of something soft around his neck. I even bought candles for the dining table, imagining us gathered together once more. I told myself, maybe when they see the house, the food, the decorations, maybe they'll remember what we once had. Deep inside, though, there was a shadow of doubt. The last phone call hadn't gone well. The conversation was short, almost cold. They had argued with me about decisions I'd made in the past. Things I couldn't undo, mistakes that still haunted me. I had apologized many times, but sometimes apologies don't heal wounds. Sometimes the scars remain. That night, I sat alone by the fire with a cup of tea, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of us bundled in coats, smiling in front of a glowing tree in the town square. Pictures of messy wrapping paper scattered on the floor while we laughed. Pictures of my children's younger faces, faces that hadn't yet learned disappointment or resentment. As I stared at those photos, I felt something stir inside me, a mixture of longing and fear. I couldn't stop asking myself, what if this Christmas is different? What if they really don't want me there anymore? The thought was unbearable, but I also knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to let go of them. I couldn't let Christmas pass as just another day of silence. So, I began to plan, not just for the meal or the decorations, not just for the gifts, but for something far more important, something that could remind my children of where we came from, of the love that still existed beneath the anger. I went to the attic and pulled out an old wooden box. Inside, neatly tied with ribbons, were dozens of letters I had written over the years. Letters I never gave them. Letters I wrote late at night, when I was overwhelmed with love, fear, or hope. Letters for birthdays, for milestones, for simple moments I didn't want them to forget. As I flipped through them, I realized something. These letters told the story of our family. They were proof of the love I had always carried for them, even in the hardest times. And that's when I made the decision. This Christmas, I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't try to explain myself again. Instead, I would give them the only gift that truly mattered, my heart, written in words, sealed in envelopes. I carefully chose a letter for each child, pairing it with an old photograph of the memory I had written about. As I prepared the envelopes, I whispered to myself, maybe they've forgotten, but I will help them remember. And with that, I placed the envelopes inside my drawer, ready for Christmas Eve. At that moment, I had no idea how much those simple envelopes would change everything. As the days crept closer to Christmas Eve, my house felt both full and empty at the same time. Full of decorations, scents, and carefully prepared gifts, yet empty of the laughter that used to echo through these walls. I tried to convince myself that this was normal, that every family goes through phases. But deep down, I could feel it. The tension between me and my children was building like a storm waiting to break. I had spoken to each of them at different times over the phone. The conversations were short, clipped, and full of invisible walls. My eldest daughter, Anna, barely responded to my questions. My son Daniel was polite, but distant, as if he was speaking to an acquaintance, not his own mother. And my youngest Grace avoided my calls entirely, sending only short text messages like busy or can't talk now. It broke my heart. Once, these children used to confide in me about everything, their friends, their dreams, their heartbreaks. Now, every word between us felt heavy, strained, as if the air itself resisted us. I could sense what lingered beneath. Resentment, disappointment, maybe even anger. The memory of our last Thanksgiving still haunted me. That was the first time I felt like an outsider in my own family. The arguments had started small, comments about the past, disagreements about choices I made after their father passed away. But then it grew into something larger. I remembered Anna's sharp voice. You never listened to us. You always made decisions for yourself, not for the family. I remembered Daniel's silence, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite read, and Grace, who had stormed out of the room in tears. That night, I went to bed with a pit in my stomach, praying Christmas would be different. But as I sat at the kitchen table one cold December morning, sipping tea and rereading Grace's latest one-word reply, fine, I knew that things hadn't changed. The cracks in our family hadn't healed. They had only deepened. I tried not to let despair swallow me. Instead, I threw myself into preparations. If I could create the perfect Christmas, the food, the decorations, the warmth, maybe it would soften their hearts. Maybe the atmosphere itself could remind them of what we once had. Still, no matter how much I tried to hide it, the tension was everywhere. When I called Anna to ask about her plans, she sighed heavily. "Mom, I don't know if I can make it. Things are complicated." My chest tightened. "Sweetheart, it's Christmas. We've always been together. Can't we put things aside just for one night?" Silence followed, then a flat response. "We'll see." The call ended, leaving me staring at the phone as tears welled up. With Daniel, it was the same. He said he'd try to come, but his tone carried no excitement. Grace didn't even answer my call at all. Every night, I replayed those conversations in my mind, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I failed them? Had I been too strict, too blind to their needs when they were younger? I had always tried my best, but maybe my best hadn't been enough. The tension seeped into everything. Even when I was decorating the house, I could feel it. I hung stockings over the fireplace, but the names embroidered on them felt like distant memories rather than living bonds. I cooked meals, but each dish reminded me of a time when the kitchen was filled with chatter, when my children argued playfully over who got the first cookie. Now, there was only silence. The closer Christmas Eve came, the heavier the silence grew. Friends and neighbors were busy sharing their excitement, posting photos online of family gatherings, parties, reunions. Every image was a reminder of what I might not have anymore. The storm inside me only grew stronger when I overheard something during a quick trip to the grocery store. A neighbor, chatting casually with another, mentioned how my children had been avoiding me. "They don't go to her house much anymore," she said, almost whispering. "I think they're upset with her about something." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. It was one thing to feel the rejection in private. It was another to know that the world around me could see it too. That night, as snowflakes tapped softly against the window, I sat by the fire and held the envelopes I had prepared. My hands trembled. Would this even work? What if the letters only made things worse? What if my children read them and laughed or tore them apart, or told me that words couldn't erase the past? The fear gnawed at me, yet at the same time, a spark of hope refused to die. I told myself that no matter how tense things were, no matter how broken we felt, the truth of our love, the memories we shared, still existed. Still, I couldn't ignore the rising storm. On the evening before Christmas Eve, Anna finally called me. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "I'm coming tomorrow, but I don't want any drama. Please don't bring up the past." My heart pounded. "I just want us to be together," I whispered. Her silence was deafening. Then she muttered, "We'll talk tomorrow," before hanging up. I set the phone down and closed my eyes, my chest heavy with dread. The house was ready, the table set, the tree glowing with the lights. But inside, I knew the truth. This Christmas wouldn't be simple. The tension was thick, and I could already feel the moment approaching. The moment when everything would come crashing down. And yet, I clung to the envelopes, to the memories, to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they would be the key to breaking through the storm. Christmas Eve arrived with a quiet stillness. Outside, the world looked magical. Snow covered the rooftops, the street lamps glowed softly, and the faint sound of carolers drifted from a few blocks away. But inside my house, my heart pounded with both hope and dread. The dining table was set perfectly. A golden roast sat in the center, surrounded by bowls of mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and warm bread rolls. Candles flickered gently, casting a glow over the silverware I had polished until it shone. The tree twinkled in the corner, ornaments reflecting the light like tiny stars. On the surface, it looked like the perfect Christmas, but the perfection was only on the outside. Inside me, there was fear. I knew tonight could either mend what was broken or shatter it forever. The doorbell rang, and I rushed to answer it. My eldest, Anna, stood there with her husband. Her face was polite but cold, her smile stiff. She brushed past me with a quiet hello that carried no warmth. A few minutes later, Daniel arrived. He hugged me, but the hug was quick, half-hearted. He looked tired, worn, like he had dragged himself here out of obligation, not love. Finally, Grace appeared. My youngest daughter. She didn't even look at me at first. Her eyes went straight to her siblings. When I reached to embrace her, she hesitated, then let me, but her arms barely wrapped around me. The moment lasted only seconds before she pulled away. The tension was immediate. I tried to ignore it, tried to fill the silence with cheerful chatter about the food, the decorations, the memories of past Christmases. But every attempt was met with short responses, awkward nods, or silence. As we sat at the table, I noticed the way they avoided looking at me. They spoke to each other, but rarely to me. My heart sank deeper with every passing minute. Finally, it happened. Anna set down her fork and looked at me with eyes that had lost their softness. "Mom, we need to be honest with you," she said. The room froze. My stomach turned. She took a breath and continued. "We didn't want to come tonight. We only came because it's Christmas. But the truth is, we don't feel at home here anymore. Not with you." Her words cut through me like a knife. Grace nodded, her eyes glassy with restrained anger. "You don't get it, Mom. For years, you made choices without asking us. You kept secrets. You acted like you always knew best, and we were just kids who didn't matter. And now you expect us to sit here and pretend like nothing happened?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Daniel, usually the quiet one, finally broke his silence. His voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of truth. "We've been carrying so much resentment, Mom. We never said it before, but we feel like you chose your own path, and we were left behind. We feel abandoned." Abandoned. The word echoed inside me like a cruel bell. My eyes blurred with tears. I wanted to scream, to tell them how much I had sacrificed, how every decision I made had been with their futures in mind. But I couldn't. I just sat there, trembling, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Grace pushed her plate away. "You can't just fix everything with dinner and decorations. You can't pretend the past didn't happen." The candles flickered as silence fell over the room. My children's faces were full of hurt, disappointment, even anger. And for the first time, I realized just how deep their wounds ran. The rejection was clear. They weren't here to celebrate with me. They were here out of pity, out of duty, maybe even out of guilt. But not love, not the warmth we once had. I felt my heart shatter. Tears slid down my cheeks as I whispered, "I never meant to hurt you. Everything I did, I thought it was for you, for this family." But Anna shook her head. "Intentions don't erase pain, Mom." Her words silenced me completely. For a long moment, no one spoke. The crackling of the fireplace was the only sound in the room. The food on the table grew cold as the weight of truth hung over us. I looked at them, my children, my everything, and for the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The rejection was complete, but even in that moment of despair, something inside me stirred. The envelopes, the letters I had written, the memories I had preserved. I knew this was my last chance, my last hope to bridge the gap, to remind them of who we once were. I wiped my tears, stood slowly, and walked toward the drawer where I had hidden the envelopes. My children watched me with wary eyes, probably expecting another argument, another defense. But I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply turned back to the table, placed one envelope in front of each of them, and whispered, "Before you decide I no longer belong in your lives, I want you to remember where we came from. Please, just open these." The room went silent. My children glanced at each other, then down at the envelopes. Confusion flickered in their eyes. For a moment, no one moved. And then Anna reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked hers up. Grace followed, reluctantly. Daniel stared at his envelope for a long moment before finally sliding it closer. My heart raced. Everything rested on this. These envelopes carried my truth, my memories, my love. I sat back down, waiting, as they carefully opened them. The rejection had cut me deeper than I thought possible. But maybe, just maybe, the words I had written would be the beginning of healing. The room was still, so still that I could hear the faint hiss of the candles burning low on the table. My children stared at the envelopes in front of them, their expressions guarded, their hearts clearly braced for disappointment. I knew what they were expecting. Money, a last desperate attempt to buy their forgiveness, or maybe one more hollow explanation. But that wasn't what I had given them. Anna was the first to break the silence. She slipped her finger under the flap of her envelope and slowly pulled out a folded piece of paper. The paper was worn at the edges, yellowed with time, the ink slightly smudged. She frowned as she unfolded it, and her eyes began to scan the words. Her lips parted slightly. Her breath caught. It was the letter I had written the night she lost her first tooth. I had stayed up late, too excited to sleep, writing about how proud I was of her, about how I wished she would always remember how brave she had been that night. Alongside the letter was a photograph. Anna, 5 years old, grinning with a gap in her teeth, holding a pillow like it was the greatest treasure in the world. Her hands trembled as she held the photo. For the first time that evening, her eyes softened. Grace reluctantly opened hers next. Inside was a letter written on pink stationery, with uneven handwriting. It was the letter I had written on the night of her first school play. She had been terrified, hiding behind the curtain, refusing to step onto the stage. I had knelt beside her and whispered, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you, and that will always be enough." In the letter, I had written how proud I was of her courage, how my heart had nearly burst when she finally walked out onto the stage in her tiny costume. With it, I had tucked a photo of her smiling shyly under the stage lights, her cheeks red, her costume slightly crooked, but her eyes glowing with joy. Grace's lips quivered as she read. She blinked hard, trying to fight the tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. Daniel finally opened his. His letter was longer than the others. It was the one I had written the night he rode his bike without training wheels for the first time. He had fallen so many times, scraped his knees until they bled, and wanted to give up. But he had gotten back on, over and over, until finally he rode steady and free down the street. I had written about how that moment was a metaphor for life, how no matter how many times he fell, I believed he had the strength to rise again. Inside his envelope was a photograph. Daniel, no older than 7, beaming proudly, a bandage on his knee, gripping the handlebars of his little red bike. As he stared at the photo, his jaw tightened, He swallowed hard, but his eyes gave him away. The memories were flooding back. For a long while, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fireplace and the rustling of paper as they reread the words again and again. Finally, Anna whispered, her voice almost breaking. You kept these?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Every letter I ever wrote, I saved them. I wanted you to know that even when we fought, even when I made mistakes, my love for you never wavered. These are pieces of our story, our family story." Grace shook her head slowly, her eyes glistening. "I don't remember this picture. I don't even remember that night. That's why I wrote it down," I said softly. "Because I never wanted you to forget who you are or how much you mean to me." Daniel clenched the letter in his hand, staring at the words as though they were too heavy to carry. I thought you never saw me, that you never noticed when I tried. But you did." I reached across the table, my hand trembling. "I noticed everything. I always noticed. Maybe I wasn't perfect. Maybe I didn't always show it the right way, but my love was always there. Every day, every moment." The room was thick with silence again, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of rejection. It was the silence of hearts breaking open. Anna pressed the photo to her chest. "I forgot this. I forgot how much you used to cheer for me." Her voice cracked. "All I've been holding on to are the mistakes, the fights, the things you got wrong. I forgot all the good." Grace's tears finally spilled over, running down her cheeks as she whispered, "Why didn't you ever give us these before?" "Because I thought I had time," I admitted. "I thought one day, when you were older, when you needed them most, I would give them to you. But I didn't realize that while I was waiting, we were drifting apart." Daniel finally looked at me, his eyes wet. "Mom." His voice broke. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. I could see it. The letters were working. The walls they had built around their hearts were cracking. The resentment that had weighed them down was lifting, just a little. Still, I knew this wasn't enough. Words on a page could only go so far. They needed more than letters. They needed to feel the truth in the room, in that moment. So, I stood and went to the old wooden box I had pulled from the attic. I carried it to the table and opened it. Inside were dozens more letters, tied with ribbon, spanning their entire childhoods. Gasps escaped their lips as they realized the weight of what I had saved. "This," I said softly, "is our story. Every page, every memory, every moment we shared. It's yours. Always has been, always will be." The three of them leaned closer, their hands brushing against the letters as though they were fragile treasures. For the first time in years, their eyes weren't full of anger. They were full of something else, something that looked very much like love. The envelopes had been opened. The past had been remembered. The storm was beginning to calm. But I didn't yet know that this was only the beginning. The envelopes had been opened, but the story was only beginning to unfold. My children sat frozen at the table, letters in their hands, photographs spread out like fragile pieces of the past. The flickering candles cast shadows across their faces, illuminating tears they were trying, and failing, to hold back. I reached for the old wooden box and placed it gently in the middle of the table. My hands trembled as I untied the faded ribbon that had kept it closed all these years. Inside lay decades of my life as their mother, written out in ink, sealed in words. "This box," I whispered, "is our family. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment I never wanted to lose." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, Daniel reached inside. He pulled out a stack of letters tied together with twine, his name written across the top in my handwriting. His hands shook as he untied the bundle and pulled out the first page. He read aloud, his voice breaking. Dear Daniel, tonight you fell off your bike for the 5th time. Your knees were bleeding, and you wanted to quit. But you got back on. You always get back on. And when you finally rode down the street without falling, I thought to myself, that's my boy. He's stronger than he knows. His voice cracked, and he stopped reading, covering his mouth with his hand. The photograph tucked inside showed him, small and scrappy, his knees bandaged, his grin wide as the sky. I didn't remember this, he whispered. But you did. Tears filled my eyes. I remembered everything, Daniel. Every time you fell, every time you got back up. I wanted you to know that no matter how many times life knocked you down, I would always believe in your strength. Anna reached in next, pulling out a letter dated the night before her first big exam in high school. She read silently at first, her lips moving, her brow furrowing. Then her voice trembled as she read aloud. Anna, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You're already enough, just the way you are. I hope one day you'll see yourself the way I see you, brilliant, kind, and strong. She pressed the paper to her chest and broke down crying. Her husband rubbed her back, but her tears wouldn't stop. I always thought you pushed me too hard, she whispered. I thought you only cared about my grades. I didn't know you wrote this. My voice shook as I reached across the table. I pushed you because I believed in you. But I should have told you more often that I was proud of who you were, not just what you did. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel less than enough. Grace, my youngest, had been silent until now. She reached into the box with trembling fingers and pulled out a small envelope marked with a date I knew she would remember. It was the night of her first heartbreak. She had locked herself in her room for hours, sobbing into her pillow. I had written a letter then, but never given it to her. Her lips moved as she read, and then she choked out the words. Grace, tonight you cried because someone broke your heart. I wanted to hold you forever and protect you from this pain, but I know I can't. I want you to remember this. Your heart is precious, and one day someone will treasure it the way it deserves. Until then, I will always be here to remind you that you are loved beyond measure. Grace's sobs filled the room. She clutched the letter as though it were a lifeline. I thought you didn't care, she cried. I thought you didn't notice how broken I was that night. I rushed from my chair and knelt beside her. I cupped her face in my trembling hands. I noticed every tear, sweetheart. I just didn't know how to show it. I wrote it down instead because sometimes writing was the only way I could say what my voice couldn't. Her arms wrapped around me, tight, desperate. I hated you for so long, she admitted into my shoulder. But now, I don't know what to feel. My tears mingled with hers. Feel whatever you need to feel. Just know that through it all, I have never stopped loving you. The room was thick with emotion. One by one, my children dug through the box, pulling out letters from birthdays, from holidays, from nights when they were sick, from days when they triumphed. Each letter was paired with a photo, a frozen memory that came rushing back as they read. Anna found the letter from the day she left for college. My words about how proud I was of her courage and how my heart had broken watching her drive away. Daniel discovered the letter I wrote the night he won his first basketball game, where I described the joy in his eyes as he raised the trophy, and how I had never screamed so loud in the stands. Grace uncovered a letter written on the day she was born, the ink smudged with tears. "You are my miracle," it said. "From this moment on, my heart will never belong to me again. It will belong to you." The weight of years filled the room. The tension that had once been so sharp was now softened by memory, by truth, by love preserved on paper. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. His voice was unsteady, but clear. "We forgot, Mom. We forgot all of this. All we've been carrying are the mistakes and the pain. But these letters, they remind me that there was so much more." Anna nodded, wiping her eyes. "I've been angry for so long, but reading this, I realize you loved us in ways we never saw. Maybe we didn't want to see." Grace, still holding her letter close, whispered, "You kept every memory alive, and we almost threw it all away." I looked at each of them through my tears. "That's why I gave you these tonight, because I couldn't let you forget who we are. Family isn't about perfection. It's about love, even when it's messy, even when it hurts." The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was tender. The letters had unfolded not just memories, but a path back to one another. For the first time in years, my children weren't looking at me with anger or disappointment. They were looking at me with something I thought I had lost forever: love. And in that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of our past and the fragile hope of our future, I realized that the envelopes had done what I could not do with words alone. They had reminded us of who we were, of who we still could be. The letters had cracked open the wall, but it was the silence that followed which carried the heaviest weight. Each of my children sat with their envelopes pressed to their hearts, their eyes glassy with memories. For years, we had been living in a house full of ghosts. Unspoken words, hidden wounds, and silent blame. Tonight, those ghosts had been given voices, and the echoes filled the room. Daniel was the first to speak. His deep voice trembled as he put down his letter and looked at me. "Mom, I spent years thinking you didn't care, that you were just absent. I blamed you for everything I struggled with. But these words," he tapped the letter with his finger, "they don't lie. You were there, always watching, always remembering. I just didn't see it." Tears rolled down his cheeks, and for the first time since he was a boy, he didn't try to hide them. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor, and walked toward me. His tall frame shook as he bent down and wrapped his arms around me. "I'm sorry," he whispered into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry I shut you out." My body crumbled into his embrace. "I only ever wanted you to feel loved, Daniel. Always." As if his action had unlocked a floodgate, Anna rose next. She clutched her letter tightly, her fingers wrinkling the edges. "Do you know how many nights I stayed up, hating myself because I thought I wasn't enough? I believed you saw me as a project, someone to shape into perfection. I didn't know you saw me as enough." Her voice broke. "I pushed myself until I was breaking, and I resented you for pushing me too." Her words pierced my chest, but I forced myself to meet her eyes. "Anna, you were never just grades or accomplishments to me. You were my shining light. I should have told you more, but I thought my actions showed it. I see now that actions weren't enough." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I wanted to hear it, just once." I rose from my chair and reached for her hand. "Then hear it now. You are enough. You always were. You always will be." The words seemed to undo something inside her. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. I love you, Mom, she choked out. Grace, my youngest, had been quiet, her letter pressed against her chest like a shield. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Do you know why I stayed away? Because I thought you never noticed me. I thought I was invisible. And being invisible hurt more than being criticized. My knees gave way, and I sank onto the floor in front of her. Grace, you were never invisible to me. I saw every smile, every tear. I saw the way you painted your dreams into the world, the way you carried your heart on your sleeve. I didn't always say the right words, but I carried you with me in everything I did. Her lips quivered. Then why didn't you say it? Why didn't you tell me? My voice cracked. Because I was afraid that my words wouldn't be enough. So I wrote them instead, hoping that one day you'd see them and understand. Grace stared at me, her tears spilling freely now. Slowly, she leaned forward, her arms wrapping around me with a desperation that broke my heart. I see it now, she whispered, and I don't want to waste any more time hating you. The three of them stood around me, their arms wrapping into a circle of trembling forgiveness. It was messy. Our tears, our broken words, our shaking bodies. But it was real. For the first time in years, we were holding each other instead of holding grudges. The tension that had poisoned so many dinners, so many birthdays and holidays, began to dissolve. What replaced it wasn't perfect reconciliation, not yet, but something even more precious, hope. We sat together for hours, sharing stories sparked by the letters. Daniel remembered the time I stayed up all night sewing his torn basketball jersey so he could wear it proudly the next day. Anna recalled how I stood outside in the rain during her first piano recital because the auditorium had sold out. Grace laughed through her tears as she remembered the ridiculous way I danced in the kitchen to cheer her up after a tough exam. Every story was a thread, weaving us back together piece by fragile piece. As the night deepened, Anna looked at me, her face swollen from crying, but her eyes softer than I had seen in years. Mom, why did you give us these letters now? Why Christmas? I took a deep breath, feeling the truth weigh heavy on my chest. Because Christmas is about forgiveness, about family. I didn't want another holiday to pass with us sitting in silence, pretending we weren't broken. I wanted you to see my heart, even if it was late. Daniel nodded, his jaw tight with emotion. It's not too late, Mom. You gave us back something tonight. You gave us. Grace leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice muffled. I thought this was going to be the worst Christmas of my life. But maybe it's the start of something new. The fire crackled in the background, casting a golden glow over us. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, our silence had been broken. Not by anger this time, but by love. Fragile and fierce. I looked at my children, grown but still carrying the weight of childhood wounds, and I whispered the only words that felt right. I love you, always, no matter what. They didn't just nod. They said it back, all three of them. And in that moment, I realized that the breakthrough wasn't just theirs. It was mine too. I had spent so many years carrying guilt, burying my love in letters instead of speaking it aloud. But tonight proved that words, written or spoken, still had the power to heal. The emotional breakthrough wasn't a clean ending. It was a messy, tear-streaked beginning. But it was enough. Enough to believe that healing was possible. Enough to believe that broken families could be mended. Enough to believe in love again. The morning after that unforgettable Christmas felt strangely different. The house, which had been filled with heavy silence and unspoken resentment for years, now seemed lighter, as though the very walls had exhaled a long-held breath. I woke to the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. For a moment, I thought it was a dream, that perhaps the tears, the hugs, the breakthrough from last night had been a fragile illusion. But when I walked into the living room, I saw something that confirmed it was all real. My children together, laughing softly as they decorated the half-finished Christmas tree. Daniel was wrestling with a string of tangled lights, pretending to be annoyed, but clearly enjoying himself. Anna was fussing over the ornaments, arranging them with her usual perfectionist touch, though her face carried a softness I hadn't seen in years. And Grace, sweet Grace, was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sketching silly doodles on leftover wrapping paper, humming to herself. They stopped when they saw me, but not out of awkwardness. This time, it was warmth. "Morning, Mom," Daniel said, his voice carrying a new gentleness. "Come sit with us," Grace added, patting the spot beside her. I sat down, overwhelmed by the simple beauty of the moment. It wasn't grand or dramatic, it was ordinary. But after years of fractured holidays, ordinary felt like a miracle. We spent the morning finishing the tree. Grace placed the star at the top, while Daniel lifted her onto his shoulders, making her squeal with laughter. Anna rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide her smile. For the first time in so long, the house felt like home again. Over breakfast, conversation flowed naturally, not forced, not heavy. We spoke of plans for the new year, trips they wanted to take, hobbies they wanted to try. Daniel confessed he was thinking of starting a family of his own, and my heart nearly burst with joy at the thought of becoming a grandmother. Anna admitted she was considering taking a step back from her high-pressure career, something she had been afraid to voice before. Grace shared her dream of opening a small art studio, her eyes shining with hope. I listened, my chest swelling with pride. "Whatever you choose," I told them, "know that I'll be here, supporting you, cheering for you, not just in letters, but in words, in actions, in presence." Grace reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's all we ever wanted, Mom. To know you were there." As the day stretched on, we decided to do something we hadn't done in years: cook a Christmas dinner together. The kitchen turned into a beautiful chaos of laughter, spilled flour, and playful teasing. Daniel insisted on handling the turkey, though Anna kept correcting his technique. Grace made cookies in every shape imaginable, most of which came out slightly burnt but delicious nonetheless. At one point, I stepped back to take it all in. The clattering of dishes, the smell of roasting food, the sound of my children's laughter. It was everything I had dreamed of, but never thought I'd experience again. My eyes welled with tears, but this time, they were tears of gratitude, not regret. When we finally sat down at the table that evening, the meal wasn't perfect. The turkey was slightly overcooked, the gravy a bit too salty, and the cookies charred at the edges. But none of it mattered, because what we shared was not just food. It was forgiveness, togetherness, and love reborn. As we clinked glasses, Anna raised hers higher. "To new beginnings," she said. Daniel echoed, "To second chances." Grace added with a smile, "To never letting silence come between us again." We all took a sip, and in that moment, I knew that this Christmas would forever be remembered. Not as the year my children rejected me, but as the year we found our way back to one another. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the laughter had quieted, I found myself sitting alone by the tree, its soft lights twinkling in the dark. My children had gone to bed, but the echoes of their voices still lingered in the air. I thought about the years we had lost, the pain we had endured, and the letters that had finally bridged the gap. I whispered to myself, "It's never too late." Because that was the truth. Healing doesn't always happen when we want it to. Sometimes it takes years, decades even. Sometimes it takes courage to open wounds we'd rather keep hidden. But when love is still alive, it's never too late for a new beginning. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows, I woke to the sound of my children making breakfast together. The smell of pancakes and coffee filled the air, and I smiled to myself. This wasn't just a holiday miracle. It was the start of a different future. One where the past didn't define us, but guided us. One where silence was replaced with words, resentment with understanding, distance with closeness. One where every Christmas, every birthday, every ordinary day could be a chance to say, I love you, I see you, I'm here. And so, our story didn't end that night with tears and letters. It began anew, with laughter, with forgiveness, with hope. A family broken, but now healing. A mother once rejected, now embraced. And 3 children who, after years of distance, finally came home.